Today, I am joined by Kimberley Wilson, a chartered psychologist specialising in psychology, brain health and nutritional psychology. You may know her as Food and Psych online, or from her brilliant Stronger Minds podcast, or even from Great British Bake Off. She has written a book called How to Build a Healthy Brain, which is out in March. So Kimberley is the perfect person to have on to have a deep chat about exercise, its links with brain health and our mental health. So Kimberley.
It's quite the intro. All right.
You deserve it. So Kimberley, in Train Happy, I wanted to put a big emphasis on discussing the mental health benefits of exercise, because I feel that they don't really get much airtime. We don't really know about them. And yet when I talk to people online or to clients or teach classes, so much of the feedback is, this really helps me clear my head. It helps me relieve my stress. But I would be really keen to know what the research says about the benefits of exercise.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like, where do we start? Because next to sleep, exercise is probably one of the most important interventions for your brain health. And that's not just in terms of your psychological health, the things that you were talking about, in terms of your mood and your sense of well-being, your concentration, the kind of cognitive functions. It actually changes the shape and structure and function of the brain. So, for example, one study just published found that even people who are very severely unwell, so people with chronic psychosis and schizophrenia, who went on an aerobic exercise intervention, increased the thickness of their cortices. So they actually built extra brain capacity, extra brain volume. Wow. And that's really important, because actually what we see is lower brain volume in people with chronic psychological illnesses. So, I mean, we can get into the details, but
let's do it.
Exercise really changes and improves the overall health, structure and function of the brain. And so completely independent of its effects on body size, body shape, your body composition, we should be thinking about exercise as a mental health intervention and a brain health intervention. I
think that's something I really wanted to get across in Train Happy, because it can have, like you said, such positive impacts on not only your well-being, but like you said, your actual brain. And I was just curious as to what that looked like in terms of you working with clients and how you would use that in like a clinical setting. What does that look like?
Okay, so it changes, but absolutely I use exercise as it's part of my criteria when people are coming in. I'm asking about it in my assessment to find out what access to exercise or movement people have. But people come to me for various different reasons. So sometimes people might be, over exercising and doing too much. Sometimes people aren't doing any exercise at all. Sometimes we're not really thinking about their bodies at all. We're thinking more about managing their depression, but can we use movement as an intervention or as a kind of an adjunct supportive intervention for their treatment in order to help them improve their depression? And absolutely you can. We know there's lots and lots of robust evidence demonstrating that exercise is a powerful intervention to help reduce things like depression and anxiety. So it depends on the person, but I'm always thinking really in an integrated kind of holistic way, how much of this is about what's happening in your mind, but how much of it is about what's happening in your body as well.
Yeah, and how common are you seeing that in kind of clinical practice? Are you leading the way in that sense of coming at things from that more holistic perspective, or is this becoming more commonplace in terms of how professionals like yourself are working with their clients and things like that?
There's slow movement. So for a long time, GPs will have been telling people, and I think it felt quite dismissive, go, you're feeling down, go for a walk, without really explaining to people why they were getting that information, what effect they could be expecting, how soon they could expect any improvements. And I think a lot of people just felt like they were being brushed aside by that sort of information. So it was often ignored. What we are seeing, for example, is in centres around the world, in psychiatric units and psychiatric hospitals, they are bringing gyms in and on site so that people who are inpatients in mental health settings have access to exercise and physical activity as part of their treatment. So there are some units that are leading the way and kind of pioneering using this as an intervention. I think in terms of independent practitioners, we're a little bit far behind, because even now the exercise and even the body, frankly, isn't a core component of psychiatric or psychological trainings. So therapists going in, people who are going in to become psychologists, psychotherapists, counselors, aren't as a kind of basic getting information about the importance of nutrition or exercise or sleep on their clients' symptoms or their patients' outcomes. So I think we're a bit of a way off before people start seeing this as a kind of frontline intervention, before people can expect to go to their therapist and have them ask them, okay, so how much movement are you getting in? What's your relationship with exercise? Could we perhaps help to support you to use movement as a way of improving your mental health? And then secondarily to that, it'll be a little bit longer before I think it's common for the general public to know that it's not just something that your GP is trying to brush you off with. It's actually something that's very, very well evidenced and very powerful as a mental health intervention, and that we should be trying to use it as a kind of everyday mental health self-care intervention.
And so when you're working with clients in clinic, are you recommending a specific type of exercise? I know obviously you've got like NHS guidelines that recommend 150 minutes a week for our physical health, and they do talk about the kind of mental health aspect on there as well. So is there like a specific brilliant type of exercise? Is it cardio? Is it strength training? Is it a bit of everything?
Again, it really depends on who you're talking to. First of all, I think you're always working with that person's individual capabilities, what they like, what they don't like, and their history of exercise, because people can have quite different histories with exercise and movement that can be sometimes traumatic. So if we're thinking about, okay, well, I want you to think about looking after yourself, and I kind of tend to pitch it like that. What might you be able to do that you enjoy, and that it becomes something that people give to themselves rather than something they do to themselves. In terms of more specifically of your question, which kind of exercise is best? Actually, it's a bit of everything. So we know, for example, that aerobic or cardio exercise can improve what's called perfusion, which is the blood flow in the brain. And we know that when your brain is getting lots of blood, it's also getting lots of nutrients, lots of oxygen, and you get better performance on things like attention, concentration, processing speeds, flexibility, cognitive flexibility. So aerobic exercise can be good for that, but also strength training exercise, resistance exercise increases the compounds in the brain that essentially trigger the growth of new brain cells and the new connections in the brain. So, and we know, for example, that older women who do 3 strength training sessions a week have fewer lesions. They have like fewer gaps in the brains, less brain damage than older women who don't, or only just do 1 training session a week. So yeah, it can grow your brain.
That is like, yeah, it's crazy. And it's kind of, as you were saying before, that like this is just starting to get picked up in kind of more mainstream kind of psychology, I suppose. That when we know this stuff, it's like, why haven't we been doing this for the last
honestly? And one
30 years?
In the books, I go through all of that in the book, but one of the big interventions that I think people really need to get on, I've got a whole section called Why Yoga Works. And yoga is actually almost, if you were to design a kind of physical intervention that was perfect for the brain, yoga is one of them. And it's because it combines strength in terms of, you know, if you're going down into chaturanga and all of those kind of holding postures.
And, yeah.
So you've got the postures, you've got the balance postures, and actually we know that as you get older, holding onto your balance is a sign of is important for your brain health, as well as stretching. And animal studies at least show us that stretching your muscles reduces inflammation, and reducing inflammation is good for the brain. But also you've got the breath practices, and the breath practices can stimulate what's called the vagus nerve, which is a big, really important nerve that connects the brain and the gut and lots of organs in between. And again, that's really potently anti-inflammatory, and also switches on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is what takes you into a relaxation state. So for people, particularly people with IBS, so there are lots of trials that show that yoga is a really good intervention for IBS. It's as successful at treating IBS as the FODMAPs diet, so
Wow.
a nutritional intervention. And breathing practices can help manage depression and anxiety. So often with people who perhaps are really struggling with people who are very anxious, or people who are kind of tend to spend a lot of time in a kind of fight flight mode, like a little bit up here, then yoga is a really good intervention to try to get into a regular practice of slowing down. And on top of that, you've got the meditation, the focus, the attention, the breath practice, as well as a holistic integrated movement practice, which also talks about compassion. So yoga is one of, if I'm really recommending something for people who are in treatment, everybody should try and get aerobic and strength training in all the time in general anyway. But for people who are in treatment, I think yoga is a really good adjunct therapy.
That's so interesting and really making me think that I need to do more yoga in my life. Do you know what I have started doing recently in terms of wanting to do something more mindful and do something that helps calm me but is physical, is swimming? Because I feel like when you're in the pool, you can't talk to anyone, you can't be near your phone or any technology, and you just have to focus on your breath because it's really hard. It's really, really hard.
It's kind of necessary.
It's really hard. And that's been kind of something I wanted to do as a way of like switching off. But I do think I did earlier this week, I did a form of kind of mobility work, but it was kind of with the yoga kind of underpinning. And I even just that immediate relief of that kind of anxious feeling, it's amazing what just connecting to your body feels like. And something that's a big theme in Train Happy and the like intuitive fitness concept is that kind of strengthening that connection and building that trust. And I think like you're saying, things like yoga especially really help you to connect with yourself in perhaps a way that you may not have been able to do in a intense spin class or in a HIIT workout, because you almost don't have time to do that. It's like, it's all, up here rather than slowing it down.
But also that the instructors are always orienting you to go inside, aren't they? They're always thinking, all right, now think about where that particular piece of sensation is. And also that there's so much about a yoga practice which is psychological, which is, staying with tension, staying with discomfort, holding on a little bit longer, breathing through it, which is, to be honest, quite a lot of therapy is about, managing uncertainty, holding on when something feels intolerable, finding the strength and the compassion within. There are lots of kind of really nice overlaps between the psychology of both of them, which I think make them really, really compatible as the kind of side-by-side treatments. Yeah,
I think that's a big takeaway for me. I'm going to put that in my back pocket and remember that. Now, you mentioned earlier about older women, and I was just really intrigued about the links between exercise and things like Alzheimer's and those degenerative diseases. Obviously you mentioned about strengthening our brain connections. Is that contributing to preventing potential development of Alzheimer's?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is one of the big things that I try to get across, because as people get older, they get more and more worried about their brain health. So I think it's something like 70% of people over 50 are worried about Alzheimer's. Worry about Alzheimer's has overtaken worry about cancer. As you get older, people are more and more worried about taking care of their brains. Yet, most people don't know that there are things that you can do to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease. We have this idea that it's just something that happens as you get older. Yeah. It's the luck of the draw. Fingers crossed, you'll be all right. And, we just have to see what happens. And that's not the case at all. So even on the NHS website, so this publicly available, it's right there, it says dementia is not an inevitable part of aging. And so an international Lancet commission has said that if people, and it's very much best case scenario, if people took the best case scenario information, so if you did all of the things that we know can help reduce your risk, which is things like not smoking, watching your alcohol, taking regular exercise, staying socially connected. If you did all of those things, we could reduce global Alzheimer's cases by about 30%.
Wow.
Which is around 11 million cases.
Wow. Let's just take a moment. Yeah.
It's extraordinary. So this disease, which is now the leading killer in the UK, so it kills, more people die of dementia and Alzheimer's disease than they do of heart disease, and it is growing exponentially. I think it's going to be, at the moment, global cases are somewhere around, or no, in 2012, I think they're around 50 million, but it's going to be 150 million, 130, 150 million by in the next 10 years.
Wow.
So the cases are just growing and growing and growing. And so there's something, it's not just something that happens, it's something about the way that we're living, which is increasing our risk of these brain health diseases. And one of those is an increase in sedentary lifestyles, right?
Yeah.
Because there are so many things about movement which we've touched on already, which are so important for the brain. So increasing perfusion, increasing the just availability of nutrients and oxygen in the brain, for example, but particularly BDNF. So when you exercise, also when you're exposed to heat and lots of other things, your brain releases a compound called BDNF, and also IGF-1, which is a growth hormone. And both of these work to stimulate the growth of new brain cells. And why that's important is because of a concept called cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve is the idea, I call it a pension plan for your brain. So basically, and it comes from a study that happened way back in the 80s, back in the 80s. And some neuroscientists were looking at the brains of older people who'd been in a nursing home in New York. And the thing about Alzheimer's disease is that there's usually a very, very good correlation between the symptoms that you have when you're alive and the amount of damage that you can see in your brain after your death in post-mortem. So the researchers were looking at these people's brains. So they assessed them when they're alive and said, okay, these people have dementia, these people don't have dementia, these people have severe Alzheimer's, these people are fine. And then they found this really extraordinary thing when they looked at their brains in post-mortem. And they found that there were some people who, despite having really severe lesions in their brain that we would really expect them to have quite serious Alzheimer's disease, were absolutely fine. They didn't have any symptoms when they were alive. And what they found was extraordinary about these people's brains is that they were heavier than the people who did have symptoms and did have lesions. And so they thought, okay, so what's this? Were these people just born with heavier brains? They thought, well, no, probably not. Actually, what we think happens is that something about their lifestyles means that over their lifetimes, they built up extra brain capacity. So like a pension plan. So like, if you start your pension plan in your 20s, you're going to have more to draw on than someone who starts it in their 40s. So something about these people's lifestyles meant that they built up this extra brain capacity so that when they did start to develop dementia, their brains could compensate. They could kind of move around the lesions, or there's extra brain capacity in order for them to be able to carry on and be okay without losing function, without kind of showing any symptoms. And one of the things about exercise, and to bring it right back round, and the promotion of BDNF is that it promotes this extra growth, this extra capacity. So like I said, with the schizophrenia patients, that giving them regular aerobic exercise increase the thickness of their brains. It's this same mechanism. And so what I'm really trying to get across to people is that if you can start doing more of these lifestyle factors, eating well. So we know, for example, omega-3 increases BDNF in the brain, which upregulates this growth of these new brain cells. If you eat well, if you get regular exercise, if you're taking care of your sleep, if you're continuing to learn, so learning is another way that you can upregulate BDNF, then you're building your brain pension plan. And you can, there's no guarantees. Sometimes people can have these pristine lifestyles and they get unlucky, but you're increasing your chances of delaying getting it, or perhaps for some very lucky people getting it at all. So, and exercise is really the most robust way we have of upregulating BDNF production in the brain.
And it is relatively, to some extent, it's accessible in the sense that we could all go for a walk.
Anything.
Or you could do air
do
something in your living
bedroom.
room. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to take up a lot of space. You don't have to go anywhere. So many good free online exercise courses, whether it's yoga or body weight HIIT in your living room. It absolutely all counts. It absolutely all counts.
Yeah, because there's tons of stuff on YouTube. I mean, I know I've put out free resources, but I also know there's a ton of other stuff on YouTube as an example of things that you can do. Even, you know, if it's like, I mean, I'm of the mindset that, you know, 10 minutes of something is better than 10 minutes of nothing, if that's what you feel that you can give. And I think that's, to me, part of, you know, getting to a point where you have I think a healthy relationship with exercise is finding that intrinsic motivation. And I think learning about these kind of things, you're like, damn, like this could really be, you know, this could be so beneficial for me. And you know, this is and huge
not just for
and significant,
now, but for the long
term, future. Yeah,
you know, this is about having a good older age. This is about, you know, being able to be independent as you get older and still being able to have good social relationships and connect with your friends and family. It's so important, and we're living longer and longer. So it's I think the World Health Organization called it, you know, the crisis, the health crisis of the 21st century. We really need to get a grip of this, and exercise is one of the ways that we can really help do that. And again, it doesn't need to be you know, people again have this idea of exercise as exercise classes. You know, if you dance, you know, if you, any way that you want to move, if you want to do roller derby, if you want to like any way that moves you and gets you to move counts. As far as your brain knows, it's just getting some lovely delicious chemicals that's going to help it get stronger.
Like, preach it louder, because that's something that I want people to know, that it's like, ultimately, do the thing you enjoy, and you're gonna want to do it, look forward to doing it, and you're picking up all these benefits along the way, which is incredible. Now I want to take a slight pivot, I suppose, and talk about the concept of, I hear a lot of people saying, and we kind of touched on this earlier, about the feedback I get from people saying how great exercise is for their mental health and how it supports them, and we spoke about how you use it as an intervention in clinic, and how you use it as part of treating people. But what do you think of the phrase when people say exercise is my therapy? Exercise, you know, that if we're exercising, then mental health box is ticked. I'm sure you've heard of this. I'm thinking your face tells me you've heard
I feel like
of this.
people wouldn't dare to say that to me.
Well, that's true. But I get a lot of, you know, I know people like, do you know what? I was like, maybe you should talk to someone. I'll just go for a run, or I'll just go to the gym. Let's discuss. Let's discuss.
Okay. So to an extent, I can sympathize and I can understand, right? So yes, when you exercise, and when you exercise regularly, you get lots of these psychological benefits. You get a release of endorphins, so you feel better and you feel less pain, and you get a slight euphoria, which, if you've been feeling low, is going to shift you out of that, or at least greatly improve it, right? You're going to get better clarity of thought. You're going to have more energy, more ability to pay attention. You do get improvements in mood. So there are lots of ways in which, you know, I can kind of buy in to the idea that exercise is therapeutic.
That's the thing I was looking for.
But of course, therapy is something completely different.
Yeah.
You know, and in therapy, we're really thinking about the causes and the underlying roots of pain, discomfort, dissatisfaction, distress, stress itself. And absolutely, exercise, as I say, can help support and to mitigate that. But the risk is that you'll just end up putting lots and lots and lots and lots of band-aids over the issue rather than addressing it altogether. And then I guess the other risk is that if you only have exercise to draw on, it becomes the only thing that you use. And then you're stuck into the risk of over-exercising, maybe addiction to exercise, overtraining, and then the consequent risks and problems that come from that.
Yeah, and I will speak to that from personal experience of, and having in therapy at the moment, having these revelations of like, that's why I did that. And I maybe it's interesting because I know we've had conversations about this in the past, and being able to observe in other people how they form their habits with exercise, but also understanding why I've had my past habits. And so my backstory is that, which I didn't include in the book, but when I was 17, my dad died, and I quickly, not moved on, but I was quite like, just carry on, I'm just going to live my life and just going to do it. And even despite being really sad and things, but you know, I just wanted to carry on. But it was in drama school, when other factors were at play, that I started to turn to exercise and food as a means to cope with that situation. And I always understood in hindsight that I'd turned to exercise and food as a means to cope and a means to control stuff that was going on at the time. But it was really interesting talking to my therapist about this, and she said, well, a lot of us want to be in our bodies so we don't have to be in our minds. And that really clicked for me, because I was like, that's exactly what it was. I didn't know, I wouldn't say in the time that I felt like particularly like I'm super sad and I'm grieving in this moment, but it was like this underlying thing where I think I just wanted to focus on exercise, and I wanted to just do that, and if I could just sort out my body and everything from the neck downwards,
feel potent and powerful,
I'm in control.
Changes, and you're in kind of absolute control, and that's lovely in comparison to the chaos that you feel is happening in the world around you or inside you, kind of emotionally. And
it really got me like, yes. I'm this penny dropped, and I think it's important to discuss. I think that whilst exercise can support your mental health, there is kind of a threshold of when we go over into that place where it becomes detrimental and we can over exercise. Now, what kind of criteria would you give for people what kind of maybe questions would you ask to people who you felt perhaps were entering that kind of over exercising, becoming too reliant on exercise situation?
So you'd kind of look at the way people talk about it, I think. And I'd be looking for clues as to a kind of intensity of need for it, rather than it being something either that's habitual or incidental. And also how much, and which in a similar way to food, how spontaneous you can be with it. So is it all right for you to cancel something because a friend's having drinks or someone you haven't seen is in town, so you have to cancel your class so you can meet up with them because that's important? Or do you end up, cancelling the friend and going to your spin class? What are the compensations? What are you sacrificing in order to make your exercise commitments? Do you continue to work on injuries, or when there's a niggle or there's something's not quite right? And how do you feel when you don't do it? Does it have a really significant impact on your mood? Are you then thinking, oh, I'm useless, or I'm lazy? Or do you end up kind of full of castigation and criticism for not being able to do this one quite small part of your life? So I'd be looking at a range of questions around that sort of the quality of the relationship with the exercise.
And how do you feel about things like fitness trackers in this equation? Because I see that I personally choose not to wear one, because I know that I find it quite triggering for me personally, because I find it brings me back to focusing on the numbers that I don't want to know. And even that awareness kind of can make me think about, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that, or oh, should I do extra here, when actually I'm learning to trust myself. How do you see that play out in people who may start to have that slightly unhealthy relationship with a fitness tracker as well?
Well, I have to admit that I have a kind of I see a very skewed example of it, with the people that come to see me who are already kind of aware that they might have issues with their bodies or their relationship with their bodies, and exercise. And I suppose I want to leave space for people who can have a healthy relationship with them. So the people who are like, oh, maybe 10,000 steps a day is just an interesting target to have. And maybe if I get to 990, I'll do 10 more steps. But if I get to 9,000, or if I only get to 7,500, I'm not going to stay up all night pacing the living room. Like, if people can have a healthy relationship with it, if they can,
take them off. I think if you can take it off and you don't feel anxious about not wearing it, then that's a good sign.
And we want to leave space for those people to live their lives without judgment, without someone kind of preaching to them. Don't do it. But I think more and more we're socially conditioned to pay attention to external locuses or loci of control than we are internal ones. And so we are told to pay attention to all of the external reasons to do things. So whether it's because you need to make 5 out of 5 workouts that week, or you need to hit this many steps, or this much calorie burn, or to even in kind of competitive classes be at the top ranking of that class for calorie burn or power output, and I think what it really does is to condition us to see ourselves as units of production rather than as individuals.
Yes.
And we start to value ourselves for what we can produce or give or show rather than for who we are. And I think that's when it becomes dangerous, when all of these things kind of pile on to tell you that your entire worth is only in what you can produce. Thank you very much. And so that's my concern, and why I would always be quite careful about wanting people to be quite careful and thinking about, why do you need this? Why do you want this? What purpose is it serving? What function is it playing in your life? And could you not do that without it? Would you not work out if it weren't being tracked?
Or putting it in the context of social media. Yeah. Would you do these things if it wasn't being filmed? Can you go to the gym without taking a selfie? These are questions I've had to ask myself over the last 5 years. 7-8 years I've kind of been sharing this online, but in the last couple of years particularly, do you want to do that? Do you need to do that? Who are you doing that for? When you're going to the gym, are you doing this for you, or are you doing it because people are expecting it of you? Yeah. And really reassessing that and figuring out, coming back to, hang on, what do I want to do? And I think that is the missing link for so many people with fitness, because like you said, we're so right, so someone told me I should be doing X amount. I mean, someone could listen to this podcast and say, someone told me I should be doing yoga, so I'm going to do yoga. Someone told me I should be doing this, so I've listened to another podcast and they told me I need to be doing CrossFit, so I'm going to go do CrossFit. And then I meant to do some some cardio, so I go for a run, and I do all these things to tick boxes to please other people, or to, I think sometimes for validation in a sense as well. And I think particularly in the fitness space online, I think from personal perspective of sharing so much of my fitness life online, getting that kind of validation of look at you doing this, and
you're so good, you're such an inspiration.
If I could do that like you, and it's really interesting to see how that can happen in, like you said, seeing for you as your output rather than who you are. And also sometimes figuring out what your identity is outside of being the fit one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see it happen also with food, again, online, where people are making and taking pictures of food that either they don't like or they don't eat because it gets lots of engagement, and it gets lots of likes and comments, and oh, that's amazing, you're so good, you're so healthy, I'm so impressed, and it just builds up and particularly on social media in a way which it doesn't happen in real life, is that you have this kind of concrete paper trail, that you have this marker in time, this fixed record with, well, this is the person you are the fit one, or you are the plant-based person, and
the foodie,
and it becomes almost an unbreakable identity, not just because it's so obvious and overt and visible, but also then because people will hold you to it.
Yeah.
Oh, but hey, way back then you did this, this and this, and what about that? Now explain yourself. And I think unless you're very sure of yourself, and if you're kind of quite well contained and you know yourself very, very well, it can be very difficult to find yourself in a position where you're feeling like you're having to justify maturing or changing your mind or growing, or learning something new and incorporating that into the way that you live your life. So yeah, I think there are lots and lots of ways in which people are being nudged into externalizing all of their reasons for being, and I think it would be very good if we could just slightly start to shift the focus back to more internal reasons.
Yeah, and I think this look for validation from fitness and exercise is because it's become a new thing to present to people. So just having nice active wear has become like a marker of success. Even just wearing Lululemon is seen, despite whether people work out or not, they just want to be seen wearing it because it's become a new thing. I mean, even before, it was like very at the beginning, I'm thinking like 6 or 7 years ago, you couldn't really shop on the main street for that much activewear. But as we've kind of got this new
athleisure.
I mean,
what
industry.
Does it even mean?
Yeah. And the rise of the boutique fitness gyms, particularly in cities. So I know London was obviously like super jam-packed full of them now, but it's getting out across the country. And so we have to be seen as people, I work out here and I go to this gym and I do this class, and it's become like the new handbag to own or the new shoes to get. It's like, I got these trainers and this whatever. And I think that's a new dimension to this that I don't think existed 10 years ago. I don't think it did at all.
No. Well, it did and it didn't, right? So we've always, with the grapefruit diet and there's always been, ever since the aerobics revolution of the kind of 70s and 80s, there has been a greater fixation on, basically since the West became wealthier, and therefore people tended to be, when you get wealthy, you get heavier. That's, as global traits go, that's what happens. When a country gets richer, the population gets heavier. And so as the West got heavier, it became more of an ideal to stay slim. It meant you were trying harder, or that you were more disciplined, so there ended up being a kind of moral aspect to the ability to stay slim or keep trim or look after yourself. So that's always been there. I think where it kind of gets doubled down on is with social media, in as far as now you have hundreds of thousands of opportunities to see other people who were doing it right, and to compare yourself to that, or to aspire to that,
or mimic
to mimic, or to join the tribe. And I think those things become very, very seductive for people. And so you've got this mixture of the morality, the need to look after yourself, and health is a moral virtue, but also with things like, with brands like Lululemon, Sweaty Betty, who, absolutely fine, but they are expensive, so they also become a marker of status. So can you afford to wear this kit, and can you afford to go to that expensive yoga class that's like 20 quid a pop, and also to be seen doing it, and do you follow the right people, and are you eating the right things and taking the right powders? So it all gets slightly mixed up in morality, status and identity, and then in your social standing. And humans have this innate need to see where we are in the social hierarchy, and so we'll want to be closer to the people that we admire. So we will mimic them, and we will want to feel that we're closer to them, and we're eating like them, and we're tagging the people we admire in the things that we do, because we want to get approbation for them. We want them to notice us and to validate us.
And I think
it's all very complicated.
It is. It's so interesting though, because I think on social media you feel like those people are so much more tangible, and so they're so much closer than celebrities were.
Yeah.
So you feel like you can comment on someone's picture and they could comment back, and that feels like really exciting. I say that as someone who's definitely commented on like bloggers I love and got excited when they commented back. But do you think there's a way of using that, or do you think there's a way of, I don't know, being not in that system, but being in, how can I phrase this? Do you think
do
that
it well?
Yeah, can that be healthy? Can that be positive, or is it always going to be that, like, looking for that like extrinsic value?
I think more often than not it's probably going to be negative, and in as far as we know, for example, and it's a mixture of innate human characteristics and the things that get turned up and dialed up because of the nature of social media, right? So humans, for example, we're an innately visual species. A huge part of our brain is dedicated to understanding and interpreting visual information in the visual field. It links to areas that manage stress and emotionality. So we're hugely visual. So a visual medium like Instagram is automatically going to connect with us. On top of that, Instagram is largely a young woman's game.
Yeah.
So something like 80% of users are women, and then 80% of them are, I think, 34 and below. You know, it's a young woman's game. And we know that young women have much more social pressure on their physicality, on their appearance, on their weight, on their health. So, we already start to see this kind of coming together of these particular features that mean, okay, so it's a visual medium for women to compare themselves with other pictures of women. So it's
not a recipe for success, is it really? It's a bit
quite tricky to see. And on top of that, this idea that we all fall for social comparison is a very, very natural thing. But in our past, in our evolutionary past, we'd be comparing ourselves to other people in our immediate tribes, or even in our immediate towns and villages. And in that sense, it would have been people with whom you probably shared some kind of genetics, cultural, ethnic genetics, probably the same financial, socioeconomic status, probably roughly the same level of education, and probably the same kinds of privileges. And so that kind of thing was probably not too bad. You probably were up on some traits and down on others, and it probably balanced out. And even in kind of, more modern times, you'd compare yourself to people at school, perhaps fine, and even then, you'd have the rich kids and the poor kids, or blah blah blah. But then you'd go home, and you'd have a bit of a break from it all, and you'd be back in people whom you are much more similar to than you are dissimilar to. I think what social media has done has really warped our sense of what a peer is. And who is an appropriate person with whom we should be comparing ourselves. And so you'll have, someone who is, from a poorer background, perhaps comparing themselves to Kim Kardashian, and then she says, oh, well, you can be like me if you buy these products and drink these teas and take these lollipops and wear this waist trainer. And then, but it's a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense. And so I think what happens is you get this warped idea of who is your people. Who are the people that, you should be or can expect yourself to be similar or dissimilar to in a kind of relative comparator. And then I think that's when you get into real trouble, which is then you have people comparing themselves to people who have opportunities, wealth, whatever, nannies, healthy.
Well, if you think like celebrities, when we're coming back to the whole like health and fitness thing, where, like you said, now we're all trying to aspire to like look like that fitness blogger, but celebrities, we kind of know that they've got a chef, they've got a trainer, they've got access to everything you could possibly need to focus on these things. And And it's just reminding yourself of that, because it's confusing, particularly when, you know, super successful bloggers actually, they feel like they're normal people in the sense that they weren't celebrities that we saw in movies. So I think maybe we feel like, oh, that's more attainable than Jennifer Lopez.
I think absolutely. But
it's not, because that person's actually got a ton of, like, I'm sure they're getting a ton of free stuff. They've got, they're earning really good money, and they also have access to these things that celebrities have, but we're confused because they're our friend. We know them because we followed them for years, and they're our friend, and yet they have a home gym and they have a pool, and they can do all these things that, you know, we don't. I think
there's an extra kind of edge to that, which is that we know that that sense of being, you know, the girl next door sells. So I think there are a lot of bloggers who really will play up on that. Oh, I'm just like, if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. But the second part of that, which is a bit more sinister, is the people who are hiding not only the extra help that they might be getting, but issues with food, issues with exercise. And so they're portraying an idea that, oh, I'm naturally slim, or I eat tons of food and I just do this 30-minute workout a day and I look like this, when actually, you know, the kind of open secret is that a lot of these people are actually quite unwell, or that they're hiding how hard they work in order to attain some of the results and the gains or whatever it is that they're getting. And so we're getting this kind of warped idea of what normal is. We get a warped idea of what attainable is, or even what it should be, you know.
This might be a bold statement, but I feel like in some senses...
I feel like we're veering into
No, it's interesting though, but I find this fascinating, and I think in fitness in particular, and in food, and in that space that I have inhabited for a long time, I feel that disorder has become the new normal. And so it's normal to restrict certain food groups, or it's normal to do a high volume of workouts every single week. It's normal to train twice a day, or because that's become normalized. And like I said, because of that validation you get, because I tell you, it's addictive. Because of that validation you get, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to keep sharing this, and I know people like this. And, or, you know, people really respond when I show my body in a certain way. So I've got to keep up that image because I want people to like me. But I think in my experience, and it's been really interesting to grow up with a generation of fitness bloggers. And I think all of us, you know, I can only truly speak for myself, but, you know, without naming names, I feel like there's a generation of us who have gone through that growth in your 20s, where you have that maturity, that life perspective, and you realize that when you were, I think, quite innocently pursuing health and fitness, because what we saw, what was role modeled was six packs and, you know, intense workout schedules and, quote, clean eating, that we did that too, because that was the normal, that was what health looked like, that's what fitness looked like, that's what people in gyms did. You ate out of Tupperware and you trained a bodybuilding split, and that's what it was. And so we all followed that, and for me personally, it was disordered, and have had to kind of come out that and rediscover what health and fitness is, because I had this Instagram version of health and fitness. I didn't know what real health and fitness was, and I think part of the inspiration behind Train Happy was like discovering what it was and thinking, oh my goodness, why did no one tell me this? Why did no one tell me what it actually is? Why did no one tell me that exercise can, you know, improve my brain size so that when I'm older, I'm going to, you know, prevent the onset of Alzheimer's or dementia? Like, why did no one tell me that? Because it's not sexy. It's not sexy, is it?
It's not sexy at all. I think that's my perennial issue, is trying to make the brain sexy. I'm like, okay, guys. And the other thing, you know, with a weight loss or a fitness plan, you can say, well, do this and you will see results in
12 weeks is the average time.
And people, and that becomes the motivator, like, oh, I'm seeing changes. I can't do that for the brain. I can't, like, okay, do this and your brain will, you'll feel a bit better. Like, it's really, you've really got to get people to invest in, well, to understand that the future isn't that far away, I think is one thing, but also that it's about playing the long game.
I was about to say it's the long game.
It really is. This isn't about a 8-week thing or a 4-week blitz. It's about, how do I invest in myself? How do I take myself seriously enough to care about my future enough to make this investment now for my future? So, and we live in a very immediate environment. And again, psychologically, we're very immediate creatures. If I were to say, Tally, I can give you a £5 an hour, or I can give you 20 quid in 4 weeks, you'd be like,
I'll just take the £5.
I'll just take the £5.
Yeah.
It's how we work. And so it's really hard to get out of that automatic kind of heuristic, that automatic habit of, well, I'll just take the payback now rather than a reward that's coming a bit later on. And that's why we suffer in terms of taking the brain seriously, because we can't see it. So we can't see that something's awry. No one's going to look at you and go, maybe you should. Are you well?
Yeah.
No one's going to do that. Secondly, there's massive stigma around the brain and mental health anyway, so people try not to talk about it even if they are feeling down. But thirdly, that the investment takes a little longer to get your payoff, and so it can feel harder to think that it's worth putting the effort in now.
And do you think a lot of thinking, right, this is worth the time and energy, is building your self-worth and building that self-esteem and that thinking you are deserving of time and energy spent on you, on allowing yourself to make 30 minutes to do a yoga practice in the morning and thinking, I deserve this, I am worthy of this time. I think a lot of people also like givers and people pleasers, and so a lot of people tend to leave ourselves at the bottom of the list, and so this stuff ends up kind of falling away as we try to do everything else and be everything else. And do you think a lot of that is therefore, like I said, building that self-worth and putting the boundaries in place to make sure that those things happen?
I think yes, and I think the key shift is moving away, and I guess I'm talking specifically about investing in your brain health, because it's not something that anyone else is going to congratulate or validate you for.
Yeah.
So it means you have to move away from a kind of self-objectification and really kind of being inside yourself. So, someone said to me recently, and it's someone she's been quite anxious about doing exercise because she feels like she will be the one who's doing it wrong at the front of the class and people will be looking and blah, blah, blah. And that's a very self-objectifying view. It's kind of looking at yourself as an object that's being viewed from the outside and being judged. And then she spoke about having gone for a walk and suddenly realizing at the end of that walk that she felt much better, and then thinking, well, duh, I did a little bit of movement. I know it's supposed to make me feel better, and actually it did. And that's why I'm going to be moving, because what's most important is how I feel.
Yes.
And the effect on me, and about prioritizing that over not even what other people are saying or what other people might be thinking, what you think other people might be thinking, which by and large tends to be a projection of your own worst fears about yourself. So you end up in this little loop about, well, actually, this is how I feel, so I'm assuming that's whatever people are thinking, and if that's what they're thinking, then I'd be terribly ashamed, so I won't do it. And you end up just kind of doing it to yourself. So it's really about trying to move away from self-objectification to what I call self-possession. Understanding that your body is your own, no one else has the right to say anything about it, or and even if they do, they still don't have the right to, and that what's most important is how you feel in yourself.
That's so powerful and so on board with that. Self-possession, that's a new one. I'm going to take that, self-possession. And I wanted to go back to that objectification and the idea of, and now I kind of called myself out on this the other day. I saw something on Instagram which is actually like more educational. I found this really interesting and I'd wonder about your thoughts. Was that we often say the general advice is that the fear is you walk into the gym and everyone's looking at you, and people like me say, no, they're not, they're all worried about themselves or whatever. And I think that dismisses the experience of some people, potentially someone in a larger body, for example, who may walk into a gym and people are looking at them, and they are, you know, we've seen the videos of people being filmed in the gym, and there's like ridiculing people online for doing like different types of exercises or whatever. So they are all like wearing the wrong thing. People do look at other people in the gym, and I think it's naive to say that they are. But coming into that self-objectification angle on it, what would you say in that like in that scenario? When, because I think for some people it would be unfair to dismiss that experience.
No, absolutely. And I think it's really, really tough, because if you've been ridiculed or humiliated about your body, this is the thing, we talk about my body as if it's separate from, you know, my brain, when actually we need to understand that we are
you.
Yeah. And so if you've been shamed for your body, actually you've been shamed for who you are. You've been shamed for your existence. And that cuts really deep.
Yeah.
And so I think it can be very, very, it can be quite slow work sometimes if it's someone who's been in a larger body their entire lives. It can be quite slow work to help them, because they themselves will have devalued themselves, their bodies and themselves as by extension. So I don't know if I have any kind of, you know, 1, 2, 3 kind of top 3 things. I'd be thinking, first of all, about absolutely validating their experience, you know, and it is awful, and I'm sorry this happened to you, and I'm sorry that other people have been so awful, and that other people have projected their own cruelty onto you. It's unfair that happened. You didn't deserve it. It shouldn't have happened. But then also working to help them to disentangle other people's opinions of you from who you really are.
Yes.
Because those are different things. And also part of that is about handing things back to people. So, and this can sometimes happen irrelevant of kind of body stuff. You know, sometimes, because people go around projecting stuff on each other all the time, right?
Yeah.
So someone can come in and, you know, if I went, oh, it's an interesting jumper you're wearing. And if you were sensitive to that, you could be like, you know, it could hit. But if you can start to separate other people's opinions from your own opinion of yours, actually you end up going, I wonder why you would choose to say that to me. Why would you choose to say something that makes me feel insecure in my own house? That's a bit mean. Are you a mean person? You know, and it's less about your shame and more about your curiosity about the kind of person who would say that to you.
Yeah.
So it's about, you know, you start to kind of take the power out of it. But yeah, you know, depending on how long someone's had to live with that kind of assault on their existence, it can be, you know, longer work. But I think that's the kind of process I would be looking at.
And I think that's so important for everyone. I think people get shamed in so many ways and
for rubbish, like innocuous stuff. Are you eating that? Yes, I am.
Yes. And it's really hard. And this is another therapy nugget that I experienced, was someone's like, you cannot control other people's opinions. You cannot. So why bother? Let them have their opinion and move on with your life, because that's their opinion. That is not you. And that was like a aha moment, because like, yes, that's so true. And whether that be about how you choose to exercise or what you choose to eat, or you know, however way your choices and how you spend your time. I think,
do you have a good morning routine, or, you know?
That is a bit of I won't lie, I don't have a morning routine, and you know, I feel like as someone who has a presence online, perhaps I should. I don't know, because there's a kind of a pressure of, I get up at 5 a.m. and
for that.
There's like all these boxes you have to tick. And in the wellness space, I think in the wellness world, do you have crystals? I personally don't. Do you have all these, you know, do you
have your tarot read? Do you know your
No.
horoscope? Do you know where
No.
Mercury is in retrograde at the moment?
No. But recently my technology was failing me miserably, and I had so many DMs telling me Mercury's in retrograde. I was like, well, that's it then. Well, that's it. Mercury's in retrograde and we're all doomed. We're all doomed.
I particularly like the memes that say Mercury is no longer in retrograde, so now you're responsible for your own mess ups.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
What's your perspective on that from a psychological perspective? I think, do you think it's like, I don't know, we look to something to blame or to have a reason? We need to rationalize things.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, caveat, people can believe what they like.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about this new revival in kind of
spirituality,
and
Me
esoteric
too.
ideas, and people getting back into horoscopes. Because I remember when I was like a teenager or younger, people were into, there was a collection of like zodiac, week by week you could, it's like a selection, my mum used to get it, and reading your horoscopes with a thing, and tarot cards, and then that went all quiet, and now we've got this new resurgence. My personal hypothesis is that we're kind of trapped in between two eras. So one is the kind of, we've lived with religion and spirituality and theology for a long time. Again, innately humans are meaning making creatures. We look for patterns in things. And so, even to the point where if I drew 3 dots on the wall, you would see a face, because we're always looking for patterns and trying to see significance and meanings in things that might otherwise be innocuous. And that's one of the theories, if you're not religious, as to why religion emerges, because it helps to create meaning out of otherwise chaotic environments in a chaotic universe. And I feel like we're stuck between this quite interesting era where we now know enough science for fewer people to think, is there a big man in the sky looking down at us and making decisions about us and making decisions about the way that we think? Fewer people are on board with that. Yet we still have this need for explanations and meanings and direction and a pathway. I think it's very, very frightening to think then, well, if God doesn't have a plan for me,
who does?
Because I don't have a plan.
What's going on?
I don't know what's happening. And so I think there is this innate drive to feel as if there's an answer somewhere, and if we look hard enough, we'll be able to find it. So my sense is that this resurgence kind of fits this little niche, because it looks half and half. I feel like it's half spiritual and half scientific, right? It's, people say, oh yeah, but it's it's the universe and it's the energy of the universe. Oh, but because of quantum physics, it's this and this. And so it becomes this merging of the esoteric and the scientific, which people feel much more comfortable with in a kind of post-theological, postmodern world.
I completely agree with you. I think it's, and I think we all need something to help us explain things and help us rationalize things, and that is different for everyone. And having grown up in a very Christian religious family that held those core beliefs very tightly, it brings great comfort to people in my family.
Absolutely.
And so I see spirituality bringing great comfort to other people.
And we're in very uncomfortable times, right?
And I
it's
think
never looked so shaky and uncertain for especially younger people.
And I think there's discussion about this, particularly from kind of certain people in America. I've seen talk about how they think wellness is this new, almost has that religion aspect, because it provides meaning and purpose and all hail goop.
Well, yeah, it has so many of the features, right? You have your gurus, you have the false prophets, you have your different churches. So even as far as, if we even look in a dietary sense, you have the ketos versus the paleos, the church of vegan, you know, and all of the, so it's almost as if you have these different branches of Christianity all under one basic tenet, which is health is the ultimate goal, and that's what we should all be striving for. So I think it fits a lot of the features of a religion.
It does. And I think also to have that connection and community aspect, I think I'm thinking of something like a Slimming World or Weight Watchers. I mean, they do meet in church halls, many of them, but it is bringing people together in that space to have this mutual connection and bond, and, you know, look to a higher power to outsource the, you know, information we need and to lead us in the direction of how we should be eating. Or I
mean, even as far as, you know, the medical medium who literally says he gets his information from spirits. So it's, you know, it's kind of all there.
It's a really fascinating time, and I don't know about you, like you said, you on the one hand you have this wellness world where I think fitness and food and all that stuff is kind of heading into this kind of pretty intense direction, and then I think, and I would include myself in this, have people who are pushing back against that and are wanting to kind of recalibrate how we feel about food and fitness, and obviously things like intuitive eating, having this I mean, it's been around for 25 years and even before that, but having this moment now of people are like, well, hang on a minute, I followed that religion for so long and it feels like it didn't work and I didn't get the answers I wanted, and I cannot carry on that way. I need a new path. I'm fed up of being at war with myself. I'm fed up of fighting for this greater good, and I now need to, I want to follow a new path and try things a bit differently, and perhaps try different methods of achieving that. And I do think, so I'm hopeful and optimistic in that sense, that there is a pushback, people swimming against the tide a bit.
I think so, yeah. And people being a little bit, I mean, I posted like a bacon sandwich and some beans on toast. Someone literally posted, I think this is the first bacon sandwich I've ever seen on Instagram. And, you know, little things, I feel like you need to help remind people that it's not all avocado toast and, you know, smoothie bowls. That actually, that's the other part of this, which is this is a very elite, if we're thinking about online wellness, it's a very elite, small, niche, quite privileged group of people. And
you don't have your average person owning moringa powder. Like, that's not your standard cupboard staple that you'd buy from your corner shop.
And so there's this, the risk is that there are, which I always think about, is that the people who would most benefit from all of these things, from knowing about different types of exercise, from access to, I don't know, sweat lodges, whatever it might be, the people who would benefit from it most are the people who have least access to it, because they're expensive, because they're in, you know, areas of the country that not everybody can get to or access, because people use a different kind of language. Actually, there's a whole jargon around it that you need to kind of be with the in crowd to understand. And I think we need to be thinking much more about who this message is for. Again, are people preaching to the choir, you know? Actually,
they call it the worried well. I like that phrase.
Yeah. But is that the point, to speak to people who are already well? If that's what wellness is about, then what's the point? I thought wellness was supposed to be about helping people to achieve optimum health through their own lifestyle interventions and through kind of empowering people to make changes in their lives. Then why are you giving it to people who don't need it? Like, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. And how do you, I mean, this is a huge question, but how do you see this becoming more accessible for, particularly from a mental health perspective, for poorer communities who, like we said, who do need it most, who are going through shit, for want of a better word, and could really benefit from this information? How do we get it out there?
Yeah, I think this is one way in which social media can be put to good use. So providing good quality resources. So that's why I do my podcast, basically. Is I want to put good quality mental health information out there.
Can I just pause for a second and say, I adore your podcast. I find it such a great resource. Kimberley seems to, I don't know if you've scripted it or however you do it, but you just seem to do like a one take wonder, and it's like perfectly said. And as someone who's recorded many podcasts in my time, it's never normally that straightforward. And I have gained so much information from your podcasts. Your people pleasing one always sticks with me. So I think, that is a fantastic resource.
Yeah. And really about, I think, because one of the things, lots of people do have access to Instagram. And maybe it's about finding out how you can reach other audiences who aren't just people who look like you, or people who live near you, or people who already go to your yoga class. Like, how, if you really care about having an accessible message that's available and usable for lots and lots of different people, then actually the onus is on the content creator to go and make your message available to them. Go and find people, put those people on your platforms, but also which I hope to do is to try to do more work with unknowns and also charities. So actually, can we use our platforms to boost women's refuges or refugee organizations, soup kitchens and food banks? Like, can we use our platforms in order to raise that message and to kind of get people to kind of, out of the kind of navel gazing and self-congratulatory stuff, and aren't we all doing so well, and thinking about perhaps what our responsibility might be to other people. So I think there's something about helping to nudge the people, and people are allowed to do well, but if that's your ethos, if you're saying that you care and that you want to reach people, then you really need to demonstrate it.
And yeah, that's been a learning curve for me, and something I'm still kind of figuring out, because you don't see it happen much. So trying to figure out what that looks like and how that works. And yeah, it's not obvious necessarily. So I asked that question with genuine curiosity. I was like, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts. I really wanted in the book to have different people demonstrating the exercises as an example of showing different people from different backgrounds moving, so that there's not just a thin white woman, blonde woman in there doing exercise, because we know that we know in the sense of we've seen that enough times. We identify the exercises for those people. And I do think there's a strong sense of like, you have to see it to feel like you can be it. And I think that's why This Girl Can was so
and it did
important.
Tremendously well, didn't it? Like,
huge. And I think I've put the stat in the book, and I think it's something like 3 million people moving. It's incredible. And that will only be growing. And I know that they're still going, and they're all over the country. So I see that as a real positive. And I do hope that, because that's had such great success, that the rest of the fitness industry kind of catches up and says, so I'm seeing all these people with different body types, of different ages, of different backgrounds. I'm seeing, different abilities. I'm seeing these people, and look at this positive impact. I can market to those people too, because I feel like a big thing is the marketing is not is marketing one type of person, which in fact means you cut out a whole community of people. You cut out a whole revenue stream. I'm thinking of activewear lines who just make activewear up to a size 18, for example, and you're not catering for people in bigger bodies, and those people wear clothes too, and they have money too, and they'd like to work out too, and yet there's a barrier of there's not clothes in my size, or not clothes that I like in my size. I think that's something that I hope I'm going to try and do my bit, but I think the fitness industry as a whole needs to like step up and say, hang on a minute, we're actually, like we said, catering for those worried well. We're catering for the people who don't need it.
And again, there is a financial incentive in that, because I've in discussions around my book, I've been thinking, I was like, well, I was so naive. I was like, I'd like to price it so it was like really available to people. And there were things that are out of my
Ditto.
And I was just like, basically we can't do that. I was like, okay. But how do we get, because this is really important information. The poorer you are, the shorter you will live, right?
Is it something like around about 20-year lifespan difference between the people in the poorest postcode versus the people in the wealthiest postcode? Is it as large as that?
It's 20 years certainly for people with severe mental illness live 20 years shorter than the average population. And I've got a stat in my book about Glasgow because people in Scotland have a shorter life expectancy than people who live in England. And even in different parts of Glasgow, there can be years difference between the different postcodes. I can't remember the top of my head now, but again, we're talking about the impact of the environment on your health, and that's the part of it which is outside of your hands, and again, we need to make it clear to people that not all of your health is in your own hands. There are the social determinants of health, and that's about where you're born, your education options, the quality of the healthcare in your environment, the level of education your parents had, the medications you might have been exposed to in utero. Like, all of this stuff affects your health, but what that means, though, is that wellness should be reaching out to the people who are most deprived in order to help bring them up to a more equal footing to the people who are already in the good postcodes, with the good doctors, going to the good schools, with the educated parents, with the Waitrose down the road. And that's where I think wellness is failing, or not even thinking about it. Everyone's kind of sitting around shaking each other's hands going, well done, great job. But there's a whole group of millions of people across the country, and even more across the world, who are being completely ignored because they don't have the financial input to make the stake. They're not buying the books, they're not going,
can't go to the events,
going to the events,
the classes,
not buying the leggings, and so they're economically discarded and cut out from the opportunities. And that would be, I think, an incredibly powerful and positive thing for the wellness industry to get a grip on, and that would have to just be kind of philanthropic. I think people would need to do it just because they care enough, not because they're going to get any money or endorsement or anything else from it.
There's something amazing that I follow on Instagram. There are these people that run something called the Billy Project, and it's in the Midlands, I think, and they're going into communities and holding weight training workshops for teenage girls who might not have had access to that. Brilliant. Who might not have had access to coaching or anything like that, and it's a charity, and they're awesome. I follow what they do, and they're going into communities. They're working with younger communities, with disadvantaged communities, and it's so important. And it's something is just very on my mind in terms of, what can I proactively do? And on a larger scale, like eventually I got big plans, big dreams, but, how can we start to, get this message out there to the people that need it. And so I think it'll be interesting where this all ends up in the kind of next 5 years. Kimberley, this has been a real journey. I feel like we navigated the path quite well, actually. It was so insightful, as always. I knew this was going to be a really great discussion because you're just full of information, and I just like to sit like a sponge and just absorb as much as possible.
Very kind.
Where can people find you, find your book? Tell us more about that.
Yes, so my book, How to Build a Healthy Brain, which I kind of want to just be a Bible for brain health. So I've gone through the latest, and we're kind of in the editing stage, and I'm still sliding in extra research
like November
papers.
2019.
I'm like, exactly. This one just came out. Can I put it in? So I go through all of the best evidence, so systematic reviews, meta-analyses on cohorts of humans, so not mice studies, looking at the different lifestyle factors, i.e. the things that you have some power over that can affect your long-term brain health. And so I start out with the stuff that you might expect: sleep, nutrition. The chapter on food is so big, they wanted to cut it down.
And you're like, nope.
It all stays. Exercise. I look at attention in terms of so meditation through attention, because I actually think that it's the act of paying attention which gives you the brain benefits. So I go through all the science of that. How flossing can reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, you mentioned this little nugget recently, and I was like, mind blown. So I can't wait to read.
All of that stuff. But then I also do, because the thing that people miss out in terms of brain health and mental health is that it's your emotional health, which is a big factor. When we're assessing someone for psychological illness, actually we're saying, how have you been feeling? How's your feeling? Have the things that you've been feeling been appropriate to your circumstances? Are people laughing in the right places? Are you crying uncontrollably? So actually it's your emotional states, which tells us so much about your mental health. But we don't give people information about managing their emotions, or understanding their emotions,
or talking about their emotions.
So I have a section on basically everyday emotion management. I talk about the big emotions that people don't really like: anger, guilt, shame, envy, how to understand them, what they mean, how to manage them, how to take care of your mental health, whether therapy might be useful for you or not, and protecting the mental health of children. So a little section for parents on kind of do's and don'ts of creating or supporting good mental health in your children. So I've tried to cover the whole thing. It's out March 5th 2020 in all good bookshops, and otherwise I'm mostly on Instagram. I'm everywhere on socials. I'm food and psych. So don't follow me on Facebook. I haven't done anything on Facebook for a long time, but on Twitter and Instagram, and my podcast Stronger Minds. And
I can't wait for that book. I mean, I pre-ordered it already, so it's coming, but I can't wait because, like I said, you are a mine of information, and so I can't wait to read. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.